And I was very enthusiastically talking about my project page to proposal. Very respectable, our first generation women activist, feminist pioneer. She looked at me and she said, "You want to study all this because you're not married, you're sexually frustrated." I was like, I mean, that's undermining my sexual life. But then she said, "Why don't you get married?" I said, "Because I don't find anyone, compatible enough." I'm trying to be all smart. And she said, "I know what we'll do. You'll be like those, modern progressive women who will marry somebody's husband and then adopt a child and look very cool." It's like, Marriage is very important. That's the way we go in Bangladesh. It's not because we are Muslim. It's because the kind of cultural, the whole marriage normativity that rules. And women's movement, if I want to specify, is very, very based on this normativity. Who are the pioneers? Who are the leaders of women's movement in Bangladesh? All respectable, upper middle class, elite, married women. You do not find single women of my age. I'm turning 36 next month, and never married single woman seen as problematic. And women's movement have always traded this safe ground that we will not get into too risque topics like sexuality. Sexuality means that you're getting too body oriented, and that's not respectable for women. Though they would take up sex workers issues, because that's a safe distance from where they are. It's like rescuing women from really bad situations, not from, it's not a right, it's not a, profession, it's like really oppressive system and things like that. Interestingly, as part of Pathways of Women's Empowerment Project, I've been on and off attached to it, and there's a reading group in Dhaka, and we are reading from the last 1.5 centuries women's writings. The most iconic figure in Bengali women's movement is Ruqya, who was a widow and a pioneer in women's education and women's rights. But we're trying to see how asexual Ruqya's representation has been. She had a very bad marriage to a very elderly man. She wrote many things about, my married life is nothing but measuring the units of urine for my diabetic husband. And he passed away. And then I became this, very well-covered parda. But she is accepted for what she is, because she does not pose any threat to normativity. But when we were reading throughout that era, there were so many writers who were actually writing against marriage, that not because it is oppressive, because it did not, suit their purpose of life, or they wanted to do something. But those are not talked about. Those are never part of curriculum. These women never feature in women's movement or as interesting characters, and the deviants like Taslima. I'm sure you know about her, or Shaheen, who are writers, individual writers who write about sexuality, against marriage, or some kind of new arrangements of companionship for a new age woman, is never embraced by the women's movement in Bangladesh, because Taslim is twice divorced, a practicing bisexual, and so really not accepted. So I find it very, very difficult, because whenever you go to a women's conference or a forum, everybody represents themselves in that kind of respectable, parameter, and then people look at you as if you are this odd failure. Absolutely, people ask you, "You couldn't get married," like, my God, what a failure of life. And that disturbs a lot, except for, I think, Nari Pakko, one of the, women's organizations and women movement, who have taken up diversity as an issue. And they were very criticized, I remember, in the 90s, when there was the women's rights slogan said that "my body, my right," and in body in Bangla is shorir, which has a very strong sexual connotation to it, and they were heavily criticized of putting that kind of word in the feminist movement and the slogan. So and they're the only one who actually works on transgendered, or there are lots of you can be straight and still be criticized for not being married, and you cannot even think if you're bisexual or lesbian. You have to be super closeted and not talk about it. And many of them do have a married life, So that kind of duality does exist, and people keep on balancing that. Interestingly, when I was approaching 30, I used to work for BRAC, and people kept on asking me, you're approaching 30, and development is very also straight. So if you're a single woman, people ask you, who is there in your family? And you say, I have my parents. So no, your family. Family is equal to your married family. So if you are not married, you don't have a family. So I don't have a family when I talk. So there was a question that why can't Shuchi get married? So I did a survey, my first survey, and I think said, why do you think people don't want to marry me? And the top 3 answers was, A, I was below average looking. So I made that. And second was that I was masculine. I said, like, I have 36 double D. How can I be masculine? And a very interesting thing one came, I sit with my legs parted. So that's a bad thing to get married. Nobody wanted to marry me. And I think it just gets worse with time. I'm like in my mid-30s now, so I won't dare to see marriage normativity and how I fit into it in development and women's movement altogether. But interesting, it's a small pool of people in Bangladesh. So whoever is in the movement is also in the NGO, is also in the academia, is also in the streets, and also in the super nice evening parties. So we are very, incestuous kind of thing. So it doesn't work very well.